I'll never forget the year 1987. That was the year my life shattered. My wife, Linda, walked out on me and our two little kids. She didn't leave for freedom or because she was unhappy with me as a person. She left because she found someone richer. A man who could give her the lifestyle she thought she deserved. That single choice left me standing alone in a tiny kitchen with a 5-year-old boy clinging to my leg and a 3-year-old girl crying in her high chair. And there I was, 29 years old, staring at the crumpled note she left on the counter. It said only 6 words, "I can't live like this anymore." I still remember the way my son, David, looked up at me that night. His big brown eyes were wet with tears, his voice trembling as he asked, "Daddy, when is Mommy coming back?" How do you explain to a child that his mother isn't coming back? That she chose someone else's money over his bedtime stories? I knelt down, pulled him into my arms, and whispered, "Don't worry, buddy. Daddy's not going anywhere, I promise." That night, I became both mother and father. I became the one who made sure there was food on the table, even if it meant working 2 jobs. I became the one who tucked them in, braided my daughter Emily's hair before school, and wiped tears when they asked questions I didn't know how to answer. But the story doesn't end in 1987, because last month, 36 years later, I heard a knock on my door. And when I opened it, there she was, Linda, the same woman who had walked away from us all those years ago. Her hair was grayer, her eyes tired, her confidence softened by time. She stood on my porch with a nervous smile and said something that nearly made me laugh. "Tom, I'd like to meet my grandchildren." Let me tell you, in that moment, 1,000 memories flooded my mind. The birthdays she missed, the scraped knees I bandaged alone, the nights I worked security shifts just to keep the lights on, coming home in the morning to find the kids asleep on the couch waiting for me. She wanted to meet her grandchildren? I smiled at her, but it wasn't the smile she was hoping for. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reunion. It was the smile of a man who remembered everything, who had carried 2 kids on his back through 3 decades of struggle and joy without her. And I said, "Linda, they already know who showed up and who didn't." Now, let me introduce you to the people who made this story what it is. My name is Thomas Granger, but everyone just calls me Tom. I grew up in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school teacher. I was never rich, never flashy, but I believed in family. When I married Linda in 1980, I thought we were building a life together. Simple, maybe, but solid. Linda Parker, back then she was beautiful, with long blonde hair and a smile that could light up a room. But she was restless. She wanted more than I could give her. When Robert Hale, a local businessman with deep pockets and a nice car, showed her attention, she didn't hesitate. She traded wedding vows for wealth. Then there's David, my boy. He was 5 when she left, old enough to remember her walking away. That memory shaped him, made him cautious, protective, always afraid of being abandoned again. But he grew into a good man, one I'm proud of. And Emily, my little girl. She was too young to understand back then, but as she grew, she asked questions. "Where's Mommy? Why doesn't she come to my dance recitals?" I did my best to answer, but truth is, I could never fill that hole. Still, she grew into a kind, empathetic woman, because pain has a way of teaching compassion. Then there are the grandchildren, the light of my life. They don't know the whole story yet. To them, I'm just Grandpa Tom, the man who always shows up. And that's how I want it to stay. So when Linda came back, asking to meet them, she wasn't just knocking on my door, she was knocking on decades of history, decades of choices, decades of consequences. And that's where this story really begins. My name is Thomas Granger, but most people just call me Tom. These days, I live in a modest 2-bedroom house in Ohio. Nothing fancy. The paint on the porch is chipped, and the mailbox leans a little to one side. But it's mine. I've paid for every nail, every brick, every bill with the sweat of my own work. And to me, that house isn't just a home. It's proof that we survived. Now that I'm in my 60s, life has finally slowed down. I drink my coffee in the morning without rushing out the door. I sit on the porch swing, listening to the laughter of my grandchildren drifting out from the living room. Those sounds, the squeals, the footsteps, the endless chatter, are my music. They're the reward after decades of struggle. But the peace I feel now was hard-earned. It wasn't always like this. When Linda left in 1987, I was 29 years old. At the time, I worked as a warehouse clerk during the day, hauling boxes and stacking pallets. At night, I'd put on a dark blue uniform with a stitched-on patch that read, "Security," in white letters. I'd stand outside cold office buildings, flashlight in hand, making sure no one broke in. I didn't take that job because I wanted to. I took it because I had to. 2 little mouths needed feeding, and there was no one else to do it. My mother, Margaret, stepped in when she could. She was a retired schoolteacher, gentle but firm, the kind of woman who could calm a crying child with just her voice. I remember one night I came home from the graveyard shift at 6 a.m., exhausted, my back aching, only to find her sitting in my kitchen with Emily on her lap. She was humming softly, rocking her to sleep. She looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Tommy, you've got to rest. You can't pour from an empty cup." But there was no time for rest. Bills didn't care that I was tired. Rent didn't care that my wife had left. Life kept moving, and I had no choice but to keep moving with it. David, my son, felt the weight of it first. He was only 5, but he became protective of his sister in ways a child shouldn't have to. I'd often find him reading Emily bedtime stories, his small voice stumbling over words, but determined to do it because he knew I was working late. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway, watching him tuck the blanket under her chin, whispering, "Daddy said he'll always be here, and I will too." Emily, my sweet little girl, grew up with questions. Every birthday, she'd ask if her mom was coming. Every school recital, she'd scan the crowd for a face that never showed. One night, when she was 7, she asked me, "Daddy, is Mommy mad at me?" That question cut deeper than anything else. How could I explain to a child that it wasn't her fault, that it was never about her? I pulled her close and said, "No, baby, Mommy made her choice, but I promise you this, I will never leave you." Through all of it, the nights were the hardest. After tucking the kids into bed, I'd sit in the living room alone, staring at the empty space on the couch where Linda used to sit. The silence was deafening. I'd wonder what she was doing at that exact moment. Dining in some fancy restaurant, wearing clothes I couldn't afford, laughing at jokes told by the man she left us for. I tried not to let bitterness consume me, but it lingered like a shadow. It fueled me on the nights when my eyelids were heavy and my body begged for sleep. It reminded me of what was at stake. 2 little lives depending on me to keep going. Now, decades later, that shadow has faded, but it's never disappeared completely. Even as I sip coffee on my porch today, watching my grandchildren play with chalk on the driveway, I feel its presence. It's quieter now, like an old scar that aches when the weather changes. And then came the knock on the door. Linda's knock. It was as if that shadow came rushing back all at once. 36 years of silence, broken by 3 words that nearly knocked the breath out of me. "I want to see." She didn't even have to finish. I knew exactly what she meant. And in that moment, everything I had buried, every memory, every sleepless night, every question from my kids that I couldn't answer, came flooding back. That's when the past and the present finally collided. The night Linda left is carved into my memory like a scar that never fades. It was late, close to midnight, when I heard the sound of a zipper sliding and drawers closing. I walked into the bedroom and saw her packing. A suitcase sat open on the bed, her clothes folded in neat piles. "Linda," I whispered still, half asleep. "What are you doing?" She didn't look at me. Her hands kept moving, folding, stacking, zipping. "I can't do this anymore, Tom," she said flatly. "I want more out of life. Robert can give me that." "Robert?" My voice cracked. "You mean that guy from the country club? He's married." "Not anymore," she said, snapping the suitcase shut. "He left his wife, and I'm leaving too." I stood there, frozen, like the ground had opened beneath me. What about David? What about Emily? She finally turned to me, her face hard. "They'll be fine. You'll manage." And with that, she walked past me, dragging her suitcase down the hall. The sound of the front door closing felt like thunder. My children slept through it all, unaware that their world had just changed forever. The next morning, David woke up first. He padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" I swallowed hard, pouring him a bowl of cereal with trembling hands. "She had to go away for a while, buddy." "When's she coming back?" His voice was small, hopeful. I crouched down, meeting his eyes. "I don't know, but I'm here. I'll always be here." He nodded slowly, but I could see the confusion and fear settling in his little face. Emily was too young to ask questions that morning, but in the years to come, she would ask plenty. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I had to explain to the landlord why rent was late, to the daycare why I couldn't always make pickup on time, to my boss why I needed extra hours. I picked up night shifts as a security guard, standing in empty parking lots with nothing but a flashlight and my thoughts for company. Those nights were the worst. My body was exhausted, but my mind raced with worry. Would I be able to afford groceries? Would the kids hate me for not giving them the life their mother thought they deserved? My mother, Margaret, stepped in when she could. She moved into our house for a while, watching the kids at night while I worked. She was their safe place, their stability. One night, when I came home at dawn, I found her asleep on the couch with Emily curled against her side. The television was still on, cartoons flickering across the screen. A lump rose in my throat. She had already raised her children, and now she was helping me raise mine. As the years passed, the absence of their mother became the unspoken wound in our family. David grew tough, maybe too tough for a boy his age. In middle school, when another kid mocked him for not having a mom around, David punched him so hard he got suspended. When I asked him why, he looked at me and said, "I'm tired of people talking about us like we're broken." Emily's hurt showed in a different way. She became quiet, thoughtful, always looking at families around her like she was trying to solve a puzzle. On her 10th birthday, after the cake was cut and the guests had gone, she asked me, "Daddy, does Mommy ever think about me?" That one nearly broke me. I hugged her tight and said, "Emily, she should. She should think about you every single day, and if she doesn't, that's her loss, not yours." But deep down, I hated Linda for putting those doubts in my daughter's heart. Linda, meanwhile, disappeared completely. She didn't call, she didn't write. She didn't send so much as a birthday card. From what little I heard, she was living comfortably with Robert Hale in a big house across town. They drove new cars, took vacations, dined in restaurants I couldn't afford to glance at. She had chosen money over love, comfort over responsibility. And the cruelest part? My children were the ones who paid the price for her choice. The conflict wasn't just about money, it was about presence. Every scraped knee, every homework assignment, every nightmare in the middle of the night, I was the one there, not her. I worked nights so my kids could eat, and I fought exhaustion so they wouldn't feel abandoned. I lived with the fear of failing them. But through all of it, one truth anchored me. I had promised them I'd never leave, and I didn't. That was the difference between Linda and me. She walked away, I stayed, and that choice defined everything that came after. It was an ordinary Saturday morning when everything changed. the kind of morning I had grown to love. The house smelled of bacon and coffee, sunlight spilled through the curtains, and my grandkids were chasing each other through the hallway, their giggles filling the air. For a moment, life felt complete. Then came the knock. It was firm, hesitant, as though the person on the other side wasn't sure if they wanted to be there at all. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery. But when I opened it, the air seemed to drain from the world. There she was, Linda. The woman who had walked out on me 36 years earlier stood on my porch, her hand still raised as if she were about to knock again. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Her blonde hair, once glossy, was now streaked with silver. The confidence she had carried like a shield was gone, replaced with something fragile. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, looked tired, hollow even. "Tom," she said softly, almost like she was afraid of me. "It's been a long time." My grip tightened on the doorknob. 1,000 emotions surged at once. Anger, disbelief, sorrow, and something else I couldn't name. I wanted to slam the door right there, but I didn't. "What are you doing here, Linda?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She swallowed hard, glancing past me into the house. I'd like to meet my grandchildren." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment, I just stared at her, silent. Behind me, I could hear the kids laughing in the living room, their little voices oblivious to the storm at the door. "You want to meet them?" I repeated slowly, each word heavy. "Now? After everything?" Her lips trembled. "I know I made mistakes, Tom. I know I hurt you, but I've changed. I just want a chance to know them, to explain myself." Explain herself? My blood boiled. Where was this desire 30 years ago when David was graduating high school? Where was it when Emily was crying herself to sleep on her 10th birthday? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Explain yourself? To them? Linda, you don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to disappear for decades and then waltz back into their lives because you suddenly feel like it." She looked down, ashamed, but then lifted her eyes again. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't want to die without at least trying to make it right." Her words carried the weight of desperation, but I wasn't moved. Not yet. Inside my chest, a war raged. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash every ounce of pain she had caused. Another part of me wanted to shut the door quietly and never look back. But above all, I thought about my children and my grandchildren. David and Emily had grown up without a mother. They had built lives on the foundation of absence, and yet they had turned out strong, loving, and kind. My grandkids didn't know Linda, and I wasn't sure they needed to. What good could come of letting her in now? I pictured David's face the day he told me he didn't care if his mother ever showed up again. I remembered Emily's tears when she asked if Linda even thought about her. Those wounds had healed into scars, but scars were still reminders of pain. "Linda," I said finally, my voice calm but firm, "you left us, you left them, and we got through it without you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Tom, I don't expect you to understand, but I need this." I shook my head slowly. "No, Linda. What you need doesn't matter here. What matters is what they needed. And they needed a mother. You weren't there." The silence that followed was suffocating. She stood frozen, her hands clasped together, waiting for me to give her some opening. But I had already made my decision. I smiled, not out of kindness, but out of clarity. A smile that said I had carried this weight long enough. "They already know who showed up," I told her quietly, "and who didn't." Her face crumbled. For the first time, she looked small, powerless. I watched as the reality of those words sank in. I didn't slam the door, I didn't yell. I simply stood there, letting her feel the silence until she finally stepped back from the porch. And that was the moment, the turning point. I knew then that I wasn't. the broken man she had left behind. I was the man who had raised two incredible children on my own. I was the man who showed up, and she was the one who didn't. The silence on the porch stretched long after my words hung in the air. They already know who showed up, I had told her, and who didn't. For a moment, Linda just stared at me. Her eyes glistened, her mouth opened like she might argue, but no sound came. She looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, realizing too late that the ground beneath them had crumbled away. Inside, the sound of laughter spilled from the living room. My granddaughter squealed as my grandson chased her with a toy truck. Their innocent voices filled the air, a reminder of everything Linda had missed. She took a shaky breath. "Tom, please, just let me see them. One time, that's all I'm asking." Her voice cracked, and for a fleeting second I saw the woman I used to love, the woman I married when we were young and full of hope. But that image vanished just as quickly, replaced by the reality of who she became, the woman who chose wealth over family. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door gently behind me so the kids wouldn't hear. "You think you can just show up here 36 years later and play grandmother?" I said. My voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of decades. Where were you when David won his first baseball game? When Emily had her tonsils taken out and cried for you? Where were you when I worked nights praying I could keep the lights on? Her tears spilled over, rolling down her cheeks. I know I failed them. I know I failed you, but I thought about them, Tom, every day. Not one day went by that I didn't wonder how they were. I shook my head slowly. Thinking about them isn't the same as being there. They needed you to show up, to love them when it was hard, not when it was convenient. She reached out as if she could close the distance with a touch. I was young. I made mistakes. I thought money would make me happy, but it didn't. Robert left me years ago. He died last winter, and I realized I have nothing. No family, no one. I just want a chance to fix what I broke. Her confession hung heavy in the air. For a moment I felt pity for the emptiness she had brought on herself. But pity is not the same as forgiveness. I looked her square in the eye. "Linda, you're not asking me for a chance. You're asking my children. And they're not children anymore. They're adults with their own scars you gave them. And my grandchildren? They don't need you. They already have a family." Her shoulders sagged, as though my words had physically struck her. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her voice breaking. "So, that's it? You won't even let me try?" I felt the anger, the years of sleepless nights, the birthdays spent pretending the empty chair didn't matter, boiling inside me. But I also felt something else, clarity. I had carried the weight of her absence long enough. "You had 36 years to try," I said quietly, "and you didn't." The truth hit her harder than any shout could. She stumbled back a step, her gaze drifting to the window where she could faintly see the silhouettes of the kids inside. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Tom," she whispered, her voice ragged. "I'm so sorry." I nodded once, but not in forgiveness, only acknowledgement. "I know you are, but it doesn't change anything. You missed it all, the scraped knees, the graduations, the weddings. You missed life with them, and that's a debt you can't repay." For a long moment she stood there, her tears falling onto the porch steps. I could see in her eyes the realization that this was the end of her story with us. Not because I wanted revenge, but because time had already written the ending. Finally, I opened the door and stepped back inside. Before closing it, I looked at her one last time. She looked older than ever, smaller somehow, diminished not by age alone, but by regret. "I showed up, Linda," I said softly. "That's the difference between us." And then I closed the door. Inside, my grandson ran to me, holding up his toy. "Grandpa, did you see me?" I made it go super fast. I knelt down, scooping him into my arms, breathing in the warmth of the life I had built. "Yeah, buddy," I said with a smile. I saw, and at that moment I knew the truth. I hadn't just survived Linda's betrayal, I had won. Because love, sacrifice, and presence had built something she could never take away. When I closed the door that day, I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was peace. For 36 years, I had carried the weight of Linda's decision, the betrayal, the abandonment, the questions from my children I could never fully answer. And in that single moment, watching her walk away with tears in her eyes, I realized something important. I had already won. Not over her, not over the past, but over the bitterness that had tried to consume me. I turned back toward the living room. My grandchildren were sprawled on the rug, building a tower out of colorful blocks. My granddaughter looked up at me, grinning. "Grandpa, look, it's taller than me." I knelt down, steadying the wobbling tower with one hand. "That's because you built it strong," I said, smiling. And that's when it struck me. Our family was just like that tower. Shaky at times, built with pieces that didn't always fit together perfectly, but strong because we held each other up. That night, after the kids had gone home, I sat in my armchair, replaying the day. For the first time, I didn't think about Linda with anger. I thought about her with pity. She had chosen wealth over love. She had traded a life filled with small, priceless moments for a mansion and a fancy car. And in the end, she was the one left with nothing. No laughter in her home, no children running into her arms, no family photos on the mantel, just silence. I thought back to the sacrifices I had made, the countless nights I had stood guard in empty parking lots, fighting sleep to earn a paycheck. The mornings I dragged myself home to pack lunches and tie shoelaces. The birthdays celebrated on a tight budget with homemade cakes and dollar store balloons. Back then, it had felt like survival, but now, looking at the lives my children had built, I realized it had all been worth it. David had become a dependable father, the kind of man who never missed a single moment in his children's lives. Emily had grown into a loving, empathetic mother, raising her kids with the tenderness she once longed for. They didn't become who they were in spite of the hardships. They became who they were because of them. A week after Linda showed up, David stopped by. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, his face thoughtful. "Dad," he said, "I heard about Mom coming back." I nodded, waiting. He leaned back, sighing. "You know, for years, I thought I wanted to see her again, to hear her explain herself. But when I found out she showed up, I realized I don't need that anymore. I had everything I needed right here." His words nearly brought me to tears. Later that evening, Emily called. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Dad, I don't care if she wants to meet us. She's not part of my life. She missed the chance to be my mother. But you never missed a thing. You were there, always." Those words meant more to me than anything Linda could have ever said. I share this story not to paint myself as a hero, but to remind anyone listening, life isn't about money, status, or possessions. It's about presence. It's about showing up. Even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when the world feels like it's against you. My children didn't need perfection. They didn't need luxury. They needed someone who kept his word, someone who stayed. That's the lesson Linda never learned. She thought happiness came from the size of her bank account. But happiness comes from being there, in the small moments. The bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the graduations, the weddings. Those are the treasures that last. And today, when my grandchildren climb onto my lap and ask me to tell them a story, I don't tell them about pain or betrayal. I tell them about love, about how their parents grew strong, about how family is built, not bought. And sometimes, when I watch them run through the yard, I whisper to myself the truth that carried me through the hardest years. It doesn't matter who left. What matters is who stayed. Linda left in 1987, but I stayed, and because I stayed, my children grew, my grandchildren laugh, and my home is filled with the kind of wealth money can never buy. That is the legacy I will leave behind. That's my story, a story about betrayal, sacrifice, and what it really means to show up for the people you love. If there's one thing I hope you take away, it's this. Life isn't measured by what we own, but by the moments we choose to be present. The small moments matter most, the ones money can't buy. I know there are people watching this right now who may feel abandoned, overlooked, or forgotten. Maybe someone walked out on you. Maybe you're the one carrying the weight alone. If that's you, let me remind you, your presence is powerful. Even when it feels like no one notices, it matters. The people who need you the most will remember who showed up. If this story touched you, or if you've lived through something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. I read them, and they mean more than you know. And if you found meaning in this video, don't forget to give it a like. Share it with someone who might need to hear this today. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Every like, share, and comment helps keep these stories alive, and it helps build a community of people who believe in the power of resilience, family, and love. Thank you for listening. And remember, don't measure your life by who left. Measure it by who stayed.